You're listening to KYRS, Medical Lake in Spokane, 88.1, 92.3 on your FM dial. Coming to you now live with Gary Krug, your host on this beautiful August 16th, 2017. It's Long Waves. The opinions expressed on Long Waves are solely my own and do not necessarily reflect the views of KYRS, its staff, management, or its underwriters. Well, thank you for joining me today. Well, there's really only one series of things to talk about, and that's Charlottesville and all of the things that have arisen out of Charlottesville. So I want to talk a little bit about hate crimes and a little about hate speech and a little about how these things play out in society and in history. You know, one of the things that has troubled me a lot about the discussions is this distortion that's existed in the press for a while to where let me put it differently, though, where the entire of the mainstream media, the good old boys at the Washington Post and the New York Times and all like that, gather around and they all do one narrative. And in particular, the narrative they've been running since, well, really, last November is turn everything they can against Donald Trump. Turn everything they can. Double down on Trump. Now, Trump is famous for putting his foot in his mouth. He is famous for being a jerk, for saying stupid things, for being misogynist, for being racist. A lot of issues with the Donald. Okay, no argument there. But what troubles me, especially about what happened down in Charlottesville, I was deeply troubled by the neo-Nazis and the white supremacists and all of those people. Yeah, that was a bad thing. But I was also troubled by the reactions of a lot of people on the left to this. There were, indeed, it is true, there were people on the left, a rather large number of them, who came armed for combat, who came armed for a battle. And some of them, obviously, you've seen the footage, I've seen the footage, assaulted neo-Nazis, skinheads, the organizer of the right-wing affair in Charlottesville. And that troubles me. That troubles me a lot. Because violence doesn't help this matter at all. Violence doesn't help a thing. Have you noticed, by the way, how the KKK and the neo-Nazis and the white supremacists and all of these groups who were down there, the alt-right people, have you noticed they've had 24/7 media coverage? 24/7 media coverage for 3 days. Whoa. So here they get the spotlight, in part because the left made a show of it. Now, I'm not saying don't oppose Nazis. By all means, oppose Nazis. But doing it in violence on their terms is a problem for a lot of reasons. It is truly a problem. For one thing, they do, absolutely have a right of free speech, and that the members of the left would attack the ACLU for ensuring that the alt-right people have their freedoms, that's just wrong. That's just wrong. Once you want to start taking away some people's freedoms, where do you stop? You've opened the door to people taking away your freedoms. And this is indeed problematic. So I have a couple of pieces here. Two of them are from the website TechDirt, which is one of my favorite technical news and commentary sites. I recommend them highly. It's all one word, TechDirt. And Tim Cushing, just yesterday, wrote an article for them called "Defending Hateful Speech is Unpleasant but Essential Even When Violence is the End Result." Ha! So here we had calls from all kinds of people, essentially asking the government to step in and do something about hate speech. Hate speech. He continues, "For some reason, a bunch of people decided that the removal of a statue commemorating the loser of the first American Civil War was something they simply couldn't abide with, even though the history they were seeking to preserve generally celebrates the last holdouts against the abolishment of slavery. It is not as though they were seeking to preserve history a government might feel like erasing. No one involved in the protest of the Robert E. Lee statue removal sought to build the U.S. equivalent of a Holocaust museum and needed the stone homage to serve an appropriate place of dishonor among the rest of the relics." That's well said. No one involved in the protest of the statue's removal sought to build a museum. And this is absolutely key. Because if we want to maintain the idea of free speech, and we find some symbols too upsetting, then we have a problem. And the issue is not to erase history. The solution is not to erase history. Why not? And we're also fond of quoting Orwell. But he said in 1984 in the book, quote, "The most effective way to destroy people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of their history." And as Bernard at Moon of Alabama puts it, people don't want their history destroyed. They will fight against attempts to do so. Taking down monuments or statues without a very wide consent will split society. And he has something a little bit inflammatory here, but I'm going to read it anyway. "A large part of the U.S. people voted for Trump." True story. "One gets the impression that the current wave of statue takedowns is seen as well-deserved punishment for those who voted wrongly." That is, not for Ms. Clinton. And there is an element of truth in that. There is. So, anyway, let me get back to TechDirt here, back to Tim Cushing. He notes that the attacks on the ACLU defending the white nationalists were mainly interested in shutting down speech they didn't like, while somehow preserving the sort of speech they did like. And it cites Glenn Greenwald at The Intercept, writing about the misguided attacks on the ACLU as a result of its defense of white nationalist protesters. As he points out, the left, despite its reputation for tolerance of all races, creeds, colors, and sexes, is a frequent supporter of government regulation of speech. Many on the left still cling to the mistaken belief that the government has already outlawed hate speech when it has done nothing of the sort. It is true. It has done nothing of the sort. I can give you chapter and verse on this in a little bit if I have time today. And as Cushing notes, the problem is rights are rights. Those availing themselves of constitutional rights usually aren't sympathetic protagonists, but it's the worst of the worst that need defending. No one starts throwing around stupid legislation when tepid, middle-of-the-road statements are made. No one fires off bogus lawsuits when unoffensive statements are delivered. Many on both sides, right and left, find this concept hard to grasp. Some people believe there's a bright legal line between speech and hate speech, when in most cases it's just a subjective measurement of how much these people empathize with the disputed statements. Hypocrisy abounds. And it does. It does. And Cushing notes that even our president partakes in speech hypocrisy. He's threatened to open up libel laws and, famously says that any news he doesn't like is fake news. But he still enjoys, as Cushing writes, First Amendment protections. He's reluctant, even if he's reluctant to extend these to his opponents, even as he extols police brutality or encourages supporters to attack protesters. Right? And this is true. It is extremely hard. It is indeed stupidly difficult to bring charges of incitement against anybody. There's a whole series of legal decisions going back some way, which find the idea of blocking speech which is political simply antithetical to the Constitution. Whether we're talking about Justice Hugo Black or William O. Douglas or a number of others, they were insistent on an absolute right of free speech. Right? It is just speech. Now, violent action is another thing. You get into violent action, then we're talking about the possibility of hate crimes. And there is law for hate crimes. U.S. Code, 18 U.S. Code 249, the Hate Crimes Act. It is a thing that exists and can be used and has been used. But speech is a very, very different matter. Right? Curbing speech does not prevent violence. It doesn't. And for the violence itself, we have lots and lots of laws, and I'm parsing Mr. Cushing's argument here. We have lots and lots of laws to deal with assault, to deal with vehicular homicide. And he writes, and I quote, "What we don't need is more laws regulating speech in response to criminal activity. Certainly, some of the people making the nastiest comments are also perpetrators of violence. But laws that criminalize speech extend culpability from doing to simply thinking. Thought crimes. And that's wrong. That is seriously wrong. No one with any rationality wants to go down this road. All right? And, if you're defending someone's First Amendment rights, as the ACLU did, it doesn't mean you support their position. It means you support their right to speak. And as Greenwald says in another part of his article, quote, "How can anyone believe that neo-Nazism or white supremacy will disappear in the U.S. or even be weakened if it's forcibly suppressed by the state? Is it not glaringly apparent that the exact opposite will happen? By turning them into free speech martyrs, you will do nothing but strengthen them and make them more sympathetic." This is a real problem. The last thing, as Cushing writes, the last thing anyone needs is for the worst of the worst to become cause célèbres because of their odious viewpoints. No one should be in a hurry to make it more difficult to easily recognize small-minded, hateful people. Their ignorance should always be on display. Burying them just makes them more dangerous and more apt to result by violent means to make points. And he's absolutely correct, I do believe, on this point. So, there are some things that people can do about neo-Nazis and white supremacists and people who want to hide their identities or hide in the crowd. It's funny, they used to wear hoods and masks and whatnot when they came out. Not so much now. Not so much now. And as a result, right, some people have taken to naming and shaming. Now, this is very different from doxing. This is not putting people's emails and phone numbers and children's pictures and family on the internet and asking people to harass them. No. So also in an article from TechDirt from this month on the 15th by Timothy Geiger, right, he notes that at least one potential solution, quoting now, to the speech pollution that occurs when a bunch of race-obsessed jackwagons decide to throw a party, more speech and expression. To see one example of this in action, we can take a look at a delightful Twitter account, at Yes You're Racist, and its mission to make the sort of people that publicly expose themselves as racists very, very famous. So, right, it started at Charlottesville, and they started tweeting pictures of demonstrators saying, "If you recognize any of the Nazis marching in Charlottesville, send me their names, profiles, and I'll make them famous." It's been credited with outing a University of Nevada student who acknowledges attending a rally in Charlottesville Friday night, but maintains he's not a racist. The student, of course, then went on to say he was only attending the rally to preserve a statue of Robert E. Lee because he, quote, believes the replacement of the statue will be the slow replacement of white heritage within the United States, which, racist. And if you've seen those photos of the white supremacists marching, this student is one you've seen screaming while wide-eyed. Continuing the quote, that's very notable for a specific reason. These people don't want wider public opinion to be able to identify them alongside their attestable beliefs. Indeed. So they march proudly through Charlottesville, proudly, faces shown, and they only get upset when, somebody at Yes You're Racist takes their, quote, easily identifiable faces, which are all over the newswire, end quote, and makes them even more famous. But there's a problem here, too. You've got to make sure you get it right. You've got to make sure you get it right. Some of the people at Yes, You're Racist, quote, I'm quoting from Mr. Geiger now, decided that, quote, passing resemblances without any further checking were enough to vilify a man who was not at the rally, is not a white supremacist, and in fact runs a laboratory dedicated to helping people. Because extremism is everywhere these days, this man was threatened to the point of deciding his home was no longer safe. Looking at you, left extremists. But Geiger points out, look, this is not the failure of the idea itself. Right? It's a bad execution of a very good idea. He writes, what is needed is better speech and sleuthing, not an end to it. Free speech and expression gets messier in these sorts of endeavors, after all, and those mistakes don't nullify the overall good being done. And he goes on to cite Kevin Popat White and his tweeting on the topic about specifically identifying people and contacting their employer to complain. He says, man, that's more speech, and I'm not opposed in all circumstances. And then he has a couple of caveats. But it's not inherently moral any more than inherently immoral. It depends on the people who participate in their conduct. For instance, if you suck at it and get the wrong person, or promote people who suck at it, you're morally responsible for the result. Whatever moral argument there is for calling out, there's none for harassing family and friends of targets. F you if you do it. So, he finally concludes with, now, if those currently calling for limiting speech rights of white supremacists and Nazis have their way, how many less faces would we have in the photos of people that have outed themselves? Far, far less, obviously. And I've always said a big part of the reason I defend the rights of racists to be racist is because I want the racists to reveal themselves. And then folks like at Yes, You're Racist can go about making them famous. And this is absolutely true. This is one kind of publicity which is not good for them. One kind of publicity which they really don't want to get. So, generally they're going to try and avoid it. So we should make that hard for them. We should make it easy to point these people out. And, okay, you want to say this in public? Great. We're going to make you famous. And I'm sure that'll look, real good to the other skinheads and neo-Nazis and such people. But yes, they have an absolute right of free speech and free assembly. And they can come and bluff and bluster. I was looking at a video of one of the people who appeared in the famous Vice video of the Charlottesville activities, which you can find online. Mr. Cantwell by name, who throughout the Vice video is all huffing and puffing and how strong he is and how tough he is and how violent he can be and all of his guns and how he works out at gyms. But in the video, he is sobbing because he's been outed as a racist and a Nazi and is in fear of being arrested. And this is revelatory. You need to see both of these videos, because when I saw the Vice piece, And I said to my partner, this man's nothing but a coward who's bluffing to cover up his fears, his inadequacies, his insecurities. And sure enough, in the YouTube video that Mr. Cantwell himself posted, that's exactly who he was. Was trying to walk it back. I wasn't looking to be violent. I'm not looking to be violent. I'm afraid the police are going to kill me, blah, 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 blah. I don't want to go to jail, blah, blah, blah. Not the big, tough monster he wanted everybody to see him as. We've seen him as he is. Which is not to say there aren't some truly hideous people in some of these groups. And indeed there are. This was from Southern Poverty Law Center. The headline of the article was Stormfront, the leading white supremacist web forum, has another distinction, murder capital of the internet. And there's a very interesting discussion in here of the kinds of people, kinds of white supremacists who kill. And this is drawn on statements from one of the FBI agents, a former agent now, Joe Navarro, who worked on the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Division. Anyway, he wrote, quote, a typical murderer drawn to the racist forum Stormfront.org, which is now Stormfront.ru, apparently hosted out of Russia, is a frustrated, unemployed white adult male living with his mother or an estranged spouse or girlfriend. She is the sole provider in the household. Forensic pathologists call him a wound collector. It's a lovely phrase, wound collector. Instead of building his resume, seeking employment or further education, he projects his grievances on society and searches the internet for an excuse or an explanation unrelated to his behavior or the choices he has made in life. His escalation follows a predictable trajectory. From right-wing anti-government websites and conspiracy hatcheries, he migrates to militant hate sites that blame society's ills on ethnicity and shifting demographics. He soon learns his race is endangered, a target of, quote, white genocide, end quote. After reading and lurking for a while, he needs somebody to talk about it, signing up as a registered user on a racist forum where he commiserates in an echo chamber of angry fellow failures where Jews, gays, minorities, and multiculturalism are blamed for everything. Assured of the supremacy of his race and frustrated by the inferiority of his achievements, he binges online for hours every day, self-medicating, slowly sipping a cocktail of rage. He gradually gains acceptance in this online birthing den of self-described lone wolves, but he gets no relief, no practical remedies, no suggestions to improve his circumstance. He just gets angrier. All right, so picture all of this. And it's not like these groups actually support each other or help each other or reach out to each other. It's like the MGTOWs and the other misogynists, the men's rights people, the pickup artists, these asshats and clowns. They all complain about the same kind of problems. Everybody's just hates them, and women are so horrible in this case. And then blacks or Hispanics are so horrible, and Jews are so horrible, and this is how it goes. But they never actually get around to, so how do I live my life in such a way that, my condition improves? They don't do that. He just gets angrier. And then he gets a gun. Right? This is not terribly different from Elliot Rodgers or Jason Root. Not terribly difficult at all. Just get angrier and angrier, and then they get a gun. Continuing here from the article from Southern Poverty Law Center, it is a myth that racist killers hide in shadows. Investigators find that most offenders openly advocated their ideology online after obsessively posting on racist forums and blogs for hours every day. Over the past 2 decades, the largest hate site in the world, Stormfront.org, or now RU, has been a magnet and breeding ground for the deadly and deranged. So, these wound collectors, right, who have all of the wrongs that have been done to them that they can now blame on women or people of color or Hispanics or Jews or lefties or college professors or just whoever they want. Right? This anonymity of the web that gives them, and I'm paraphrasing now from the article, comfort in the endorsement others offer for extreme racist ideas. This is a very bad thing, but it gives them a sense of safety. Quote from former FBI agent Joe Navarro, quote, "Isolation permits the free expression of ideas, especially those which are extreme and which would foster passionate hatred. In the cocoon of isolation, the terrorist can indulge his ideology without restrictions of the routines of daily life." So, we can't and shouldn't try to stifle free speech or the rights of people to go out and say whatever hateful, crazy nonsense they want to say. They have exactly the same right to that as we do. It's no different. What is different is what is said. What is different is the making of arguments, opening discussions, beginning to explore ideas rather than simply spouting a bunch of crazy hate talk. Just a bunch of crazy hate talk. We have another problem here, though. We have another problem here. We have 2 problems. I want to deal with this one first. The 2 problems are this. I want to talk about how the entire field of language has become destabilized. What's true? What's real? What can be believed and what can't? Because this is key to the way that so many people are reacting to the issues at Charlottesville. This absolutely goes to the heart of it. If I can find that one other piece of paper I've got here. Here we go. Okay. So that's one issue. And the other issue I want to speak to addresses moving forward. Because I said at the beginning of this show, it is extremely important not to erase history, but to contextualize it, to use it to teach the meanings of history, the meanings of meanings of wars, the meanings of racism. So I'm going to talk about those a little bit more in a bit. But let's just go back to the first point, which is how do we address all of these issues in a world where the mainstream news lie incessantly? I mean, they get the weather right sometimes. And the things that aren't hugely political or of great importance to the political establishment, they get most of that sometimes right. But there's lots of stuff they get wrong. And in particular, if Nazis in the U.S. are so horrible, and I agree they are, if Nazis anywhere are horrible, why are they okay in Ukraine? Why did the U.S. support the Banderites, the Nazis? And they're not even neo-Nazis, they're old Hitler Nazis. They've been around forever. These are the people who actually fought with the Germans against their own people. And they're still around. And these are largely the people who control the western part of Ukraine. And there are pictures of John McCain. And her name flew out of my head. The U.S. State Department head of Eastern Europe, married to Robert Kagan, another neocon, standing there with Nazis, sometimes in regalia. These people have Nazi signs. They wear Nazi slogans. And these are the people who overthrew Poroshenko, the president of Ukraine, and installed this imbecile, this incompetent imbecile, and meanwhile have expanded the control of Nazis. We were okay with Nazis in Chile. Right? Think of Pinochet when Allende was removed by the U.S. government. Had no problem with Pinochet running an absolute appallingly oppressive government. Tens of thousands of people. Or Salvador. Right? Thousands and thousands of people. We're okay with oppressive, anti-democratic governments as long as they're paying homage to us, to the U.S. How do you even talk about this world of official propaganda and lies and inconsistency? So naturally we have trouble talking about things because we're not consistent and the words don't mean what they once meant. And we live in a world where everything is destabilized. You know, when Mr. Cantwell, I was referring to earlier in the interview for Vice, was asked, who are they looking to as models? And he said, well, the Golden Dawn. We're looking to them as a model. The Golden Dawn, the Greek Nazis. Aha. Assassinations, beatings on the streets, arson, murder. Well, that's high praise. And it's amazing that most Americans have never even heard of the Golden Dawn and would certainly know very little of its history. But they're serious fascists. Serious fascists. Well, I'm going to take just a little break here and remind you that support for Long Waves comes from Stage Left Theater, 108 West 3rd Avenue in Spokane. And it is currently, or will be featuring the next play, Cyrano, September 8th through 24th, by Edmund Rostand, translated by Michael Hollinger, and directed by Chris Woolley. That's Cyrano, September 8th through the 24th. More information at 509-838-9727 and online at SpokaneStageLeft.org. Okay, Well, I just have a little time to wrap up, so let me see if I can do some of this. When I said that we shouldn't remove documents, we shouldn't remove monuments, rather. When I said that we should not erase history but teach it, conceptualize it, I believe that strongly. Because how do you overcome racism? You educate people. In her must-read book, Dr. Joy DeGruy, the book is Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. She talks about, when she asks white people about how blacks are impacted economically and through, what kind of racism they see. Black suffering, the white folks can tick off all the lists, and the black folks can do it too. But if she asks white folks how black racism adversely impacts the lives of white people, they don't get it. They don't get it. So maybe black people just have prejudices, and maybe they even hate white people. But the reality is, she says, that black people lack the power to affect the lives of white people as a group. Black people's feelings toward white people do not preclude a white person's ability to get a loan, receive fair treatment by the justice system, acquire education, etc. This, then, is racism. It is the belief that people differ along biological and genetic lines, and that one's own group is superior to another group. Key point here, quote, this ability is coupled with the power to negatively affect the lives of those perceived to be inferior. Now, this is the entire history of black people, of people of color, of people from Africa, of the Native Americans, who never seriously had much of an opportunity to impinge on white folk in their society. So, but I just want to focus on the Africans for the few minutes I have remaining. All right, the great Black Holocaust, as she puts it, or Maafa, which is, quoting, in the Swahili language means disaster, calamity, or catastrophe. And, this is something we've really, really never addressed. A full accounting of the story of slavery and slave trade. The so-called Middle Passage. So, 1969 study by Philip Curtin placed the number of blacks transported across the ocean at 8 million. 8 million. Hugh Thomas's 1997 work puts the number of Africans that arrived in the Americas approximately 11 million. More recent studies that have used documented evidence, such as ship manifests, have placed their estimates between 10 and 15 million. All right, 10, 15 million made it to America. But, a great number of them died in the passage. And most scholars, citing Ms. Dr. DeGruy again, most scholars agree that nearly as many Africans died over the course of the Middle Passage as reached the end of the voyage. If this is true, then it is likely that between 10 and 15 million died on the voyage. And this does not account for the millions of Africans estimated to have died fighting against their would-be captors who never made it to slave ships. But this is a horrific number. 10 to 15 million died on the voyage. 10 to 15 million ended up being slaves in the country, and thousands or millions more died fighting. 30 million, 20 to 30 million died, murdered for money. Murdered for money. And the attitudes that white people still have about people of color, about Native Americans, the stereotypes that white people still share, are a defense, a force field around them, so that they never have to own any of the responsibility. Don't have to own any of the responsibility for the condition of Native Americans or people of color in the world today. Just like we can happily forget the millions we killed in Iraq, the million or so we killed in Afghanistan, Libya, all around the world. We can block it all out, and we're still good people. Right? This is sad, and this is cowardice. These are exactly the things that if this country is ever to heal, and I'm not terribly optimistic of this prospect, but if this country is ever to actually heal, this country will have to address and seek atonement and make this so indelibly a part of our national history, our national rhetoric, our national beliefs, our national spirit, that everyone will know it. And those who want to fall back on the failed, pathetic, weak, stupid positions of losing my white heritage, they will melt away, because the truth will be there. The bigger stories, these are the ones we must educate. These are the ones when we look at a monument of Robert E. Lee. These are the people, these are the times we need to tell the stories. Look at how big the Holocaust is. Right? Somewhere between 3 and 6 million Jews. A terrifying number. And yet we have museums and people talk about it. And yet with the slavery of Africans, we're talking some 30 million dead by white people for money. Not even for ideology, for money. And we still play this game, denying the evil we do, instead of facing it as a people, facing it as a government, facing it as a society, and renouncing hatred and bigotry and violence and greed and wealth once and for all. That concludes today's show. You've been listening to Long Waves with Gary Krug here on KYRS. I'd like to thank you very much for listening today. You can write me, longwaves at kyrs.org. Find the show's Facebook page, Long Waves Radio. And I do love hearing from my listeners. So let me do my pitch here. If you've got a car, truck, or boat you want to get rid of, it's easy. You call us toll-free, toll-free 855-KYRS-CAR, 855-597-7227. We'll arrange a pickup. You get a nice tax deduction, and we get some shekels, coins, pennies to keep the lights on down here at the station. One other public service announcement. Join KYRS on September 11 at the Magic Lantern for The Coming War on China, a film by John Pilger. A nuclear war between the U.S. and China is a current contingency, says the Pentagon. In interviews with Pentagon war planners to members of China's political class, Pilger's film challenges the notion of China as a new enemy. The Coming War on China is also a film about the human spirit and the extraordinary rise of resistance. That's KYRS Movie Night at the Magic Lantern, September 11, 7 p.m. Tickets available now at kyrs.org or get them at the door. The Magic Lantern is located at 25 West Main. So again, thank you so much for listening. I'll be back next week for another show, and I'll hope you join me again there. And if you're not a member of KYRS, we are supported almost entirely by our members who've been so generous to the station over the years. You can join securely online, $35 for a year. $35 for a year. Ain't much. You can always give more if you want. But again, thank you. And until next week, I don't know. Until next week, just don't be angry. Better things to do. And you are listening to KYRS, Medical Lake in Spokane, 88.1, 92.3 FM.